Welcome to the 1000 Nights and 1 Night. Now, when it was the 622nd night, she said, It hath reached me, O auspicious king, that when the king entered, Judar rose not to him, nor did him honor, not even to say, Be seated, but left him standing, so that fear entered into him, and he could neither sit nor go away, and said to himself, If he feared me, he would not leave me thus unheeded. Peradventure he will do me a mischief because of that which I did to his brothers. Then said Judar, O king of the age, it beseemeth me not the like of thee to wrong the folk and take away their good. Replied the king, O my lord, deign excuse me, for greed impelled me to do this, and fate was thereby fulfilled. And were there no offending, there would be no forgiving. And he went on to excuse himself for the past, and pray to him for pardon and indulgence, till he recited amongst other things this poetry. O thou of generous seed and true nobility, reproach me not for that which came from me to thee. We pardon thee if thou have wrought us any wrong, and if I wrought the wrong, I pray thee pardon us. And he ceased not to humble himself before him, till he said, Allah pardon thee, and bade him to be seated. So he sat down, and Judar invested him with garments of pardon and immunity, and ordered his brothers spread the table. When they had eaten, he clad the whole of the king's company in robes of honor, and gave them largesse, after which he bade the king depart. So he went forth, and thereafter came every day to visit Judar, and held not his divan save in his house, wherefore friendship and familiarity waxed great between them. And they abode thus a while, till one day the king, being alone with his minister, said to him, O wazir, I fear lest Judar slay me and take the kingdom away from me. Replied the wazir, O king of the age, as for his taking the kingdom from thee, have no fear of that. For Judar's present estate is greater than that of the king, and to take the kingdom would be a lowering of his dignity. But if thou fear that he kill thee, thou hast a daughter. Give her to him to wife, and thou and he will be of one condition. Quoth the king, O wazir, be thou intermediary between us and him? And quoth the minister, Do thou invite him to an entertainment, and pass the night with him in one of thy saloons. Then bid thy daughter don her richest dress and ornaments, and pass by the door of the saloon. When he seeth her, he will assuredly fall in love with her, and when we know this, I will turn to him and tell him that she is thy daughter, and engage him in converse, and lead him on so that thou shalt seem to know nothing of the matter till he ask her of thee to wife. When thou hast married him to the princess, thou and he will be as one thing, and thou wilt be safe from him. And if he die, thou wilt inherit all he hath, both great and small. Replied the king, Thou sayest sooth, O my wazir, and made a banquet, and invited thereto Judar, who came to the sultan's palace, and they sat in the saloon in great good cheer till the end of the day. Now the king had commanded his wife to array the maiden in her richest raiment and ornaments, and carry her by the door of the saloon. So she did that, as she told her, and when Judar saw the princess, who had not her match for beauty and grace, he looked fixedly at her and said, Ah! And his limbs were loosened, for love and longing and passion and pine were sore upon him. Desire and transport gat hold of him, and he turned pale. Quoth the wazir, May no harm befall thee, O my lord. Why do I see thee change color and in suffering? Asked Judar, O wazir, whose daughter is this damsel? Verily, she hath enthralled me and ravished my reason. Replied the wazir, She is the daughter of thy friend the king, and if she please thee, I will speak to him that he will marry thee to her. Quoth Judar, Do so, O wazir, and as I live, I will bestow on thee what thou wilt, and will give the king whatsoever he shall ask to her dowry, and we will become friends and kinsfolk. Quoth the minister, It shall go hard, but thy desire may be accomplished. Then he turned to the king and said in his ear, O king of the age, thy friend Judar seeketh alliance with thee, and will have me ask of thee for him the hand of thy daughter, the princess Isiya. So disappoint me not, but accept my intercession, and what dowry soever thou askest he will give thee. Said the king, The dowry I have already received, and as for the girl, she is his handmaid. I give her to him to wife, and he will do me honor by accepting her." And Scheherazade perceived the dawn of the day, and ceased to say her permitted say. Now when it was the 623rd night, she said, "It hath reached me, O auspicious king, that when the wazir whispered to the king, 'Judar seeketh alliance with thee by taking thy daughter to wife,' the other replied, 'The dowry I have already received, and the girl is his handmaid. He will do me honor by accepting her.' So they spent the rest of the night together, and on the morrow the king held a court to which he summoned great and small together with the Sheikh al-Islam. Then Judar demanded the princess in marriage, and the king said, 'The dowry I have received.' Thereupon they drew up the marriage contract, and Judar sent for the saddlebags containing the jewels and gave them to the king as settlement upon his daughter. The drums beat and the pipes sounded, and they held high festival whilst Judar went in unto the girl. Thenceforward he and the king were as one flesh, and they abode thus for many days, till Shams al-Dullah died. Whereupon the troops proclaimed Judar sultan, and he refused. But they importuned him till he consented, and they made him king in his father-in-law's stead. Then he bade build a cathedral mosque over the late king's tomb in the Budankia quarter, and endowed it. Now, the quarter of Judar's house was called Yamanya, but when he became sultan, he built therein a congregational mosque and other buildings, wherefore the quarter was named after him, and it was called the Judara quarter. Moreover, he made his brother Salim his wazir of the right, and his brother Salam his wazir of the left hand. And thus they abode a year and no more. For at the end of that time, Salim said to Salam, "O my brother, how long is this state to last? Shall we pass our whole lives in slavery to our brother Judar? We shall never enjoy luck or lordship whilst he lives." Adding, "So how shall we do to kill him, and take the ring and the saddlebags?" Replied Salim, "Thou art craftier than I. Do thou devise whereby we may kill him." "If I effect this," said Salim, "wilt thou agree that I be sultan and keep the ring, and that thou shalt be my right-hand wazir and have the saddlebags?" Salam answered, "I consent to this." And they agreed to slay Judar their brother for love of the world and of dominion. So they laid a snare for Judar and said to him, "O my brother, verily we have a mind to glory in thee, and would fain have thee enter our houses, and eat of our entertainment, and solace our hearts." Replied Judar, "So be it. And in whose house shall the banquet be?" "In mine," said Salam. "And after thou hast eaten of my victuals, thou shalt be the guest of my brother." Said Judar, "'Tis well," and went with them to his house, where he set before him poisoned food, of which he had eaten. His flesh rotted from his bones, and he died. Then Salim came up to him, and he would have drawn the ring from his finger, but it resisted him. So he cut off the finger with a knife. Then he rubbed the ring, and the marid presented himself, saying, "Adsum, ask what thou wilt." Quoth Salam, "Take my brother Salim, and put him to death, and carry forth the two bodies, the poisoned and the slaughtered, and cast them down before the troops." So the marid took Salim and slew him. Then carrying the two corpses forth, he cast them down before the chief officers of the army, who were sitting at table in the parlor of the house. When they saw Judar and Salim slain, they raised their hands from the food, and fear got hold of them, and they said to the marid, "Who hath dealt thus with the sultan and the wazir?" Replied the Jinni, "Their brother Salam." And behold, Salam came up to them and said, "O soldiers, eat and make merry, for Judar is dead, and I have taken to me the seal ring, whereof the marid before you is the servant, and I bade him slay my brother Salim, lest he dispute the kingdom with me, for he was a traitor, and I feared lest he should betray me. So now I am become sultan over you. Will ye accept of me? If not, I will rub the ring and bid the marid slay you all, great and small." And Scheherazade perceived the dawn of the day, and ceased to say her permitted say. Now, when it was the 624th night, she continued, "It hath reached me, O auspicious king, that when Salim Salam said to the officers, "Will ye accept me as your sultan? Otherwise I will rub the ring, and the Marid will slay you all, great and small." They replied, "We accept thee to king and sultan." Then he bade bury his brothers, and summoned the divan, and some of the people followed the funeral, whilst others forewent him in state procession to the audience hall of the palace, where he sat down on the throne, and they did him homage, to him as king. After which he said, "It is my will to marry my brother Judar's wife." Quoth they, "Wait till the days of widowhood are accomplished." Quoth he, "I know not days of widowhood, nor aught else. As my head liveth, I needs must go into her this very night." So they drew up the marriage contract, and sent to tell the Princess Asiya, who replied, "Bid him enter." Accordingly, he went in to her, and she received him with a show of joy and welcome. But by and by she gave him poison and water, and made an end of him. Then she took the ring and broke it, that none might possess it thenceforth, and tore up the saddlebags. After which she sent to Sheikh al-Islam and other great officers of state, telling them what had passed, and saying to them, "Choose you out a king to rule over you." And this is all that hath come down to us of the story of Judar and his brethren. But I have also heard, O king, a tale of the history of Gharib and his brother Ajib. There was once in olden times a king of might, Kandamir hight, who had been a brave and doughty man of war, a Karaman in his day, but was grown passing old and decrepit. Now it pleased Allah to vouchsafe him in his extreme senility a son whom he named Ajib, the Wonderful, because of his beauty and loveliness. So he committed the babe to the midwives and wet nurses and handmaids and serving women, and they reared him till he was full 7 years old, when his father gave him a charge to a divine of his own folk and faith. The priest taught him the laws and tenets of their misbelief, and instructed him in philosophy and all manners of other knowledge. And it needed but 3 full told years ere he was proficient therein, and his spirit waxed resolute, and his judgment mature. And he became learned, eloquent, and philosophic, consorting with the wise, and disputing with the doctors of law. When his father saw this of him, it pleased him, and he taught him to back the steed, and stab with spear, and smite with sword, till he grew to be an accomplished cavalier, versed in all martial exercises. And by the end of his 20th year, he surpassed in all things all the folk of his day. But his skill in weapons made him grow up a stubborn tyrant, and a devil arrogant, using to ride forth a hunting, and chasing amongst 1,000 horsemen, and to make raids and razas upon the neighboring knights, cutting off caravans, and carrying away the daughters of kings and nobles. Wherefore many brought complaints against him to his father, who cried out to 5 of his slaves, and when they came said, "Seize this dog." So they seized Prince Ajib, and pinioning his hands behind him, beat him by his father's command till he lost his senses. After which the king imprisoned him in a chamber so dark that one might not know heaven from earth, or length from breadth, and there he abode 2 days and a night. Then the emirs went into the king, and kissing the ground before his hands, interceded with him for the prince, and he released him. So Ajib bore with his father for 10 days, at the end of which he went into him, and as he slept by night, and smote his neck. When the day rose, he mounted the throne of his sire's estate, and bid his men arm themselves cap a pie in steel, and stand with drawn swords in front of him, and on his right hands, and on his left. By and by the emirs and captains entered, and finding their king slain, and his son Ajib seated on the throne, were confounded in mind, and knew not what to do. But Ajib said to them, "O folk, verily ye see what your king hath gained. Whoso obeyeth me, I will honor him, and whoso gainsayeth me, I will do with him that which I did with my sire." When they heard these words, they feared lest he do them a mischief. So they replied, "Thou art our king, and the son of our king," and kissed the ground before him. Whereupon he thanked them, and rejoiced in them. Then he bade bring forth money and apparel, and clad them in sumptuous robes of honor. and showed largesse upon them, wherefore they all loved him and obeyed him. In like manner he honored the governors of the provinces and the sheikhs of the Badawin, both tributary and independent, so that the whole kingdom submitted to him, and the folk obeyed him. And he reigned and bade and forbade in peace and quiet for a time of 5 months. Now one night, however, he dreamed a dream as he lay slumbering, whereupon he awoke trembling, nor did sleep visit him again till the morning. As soon as it was dawn, he mounted his throne, and his officers stood before him right and left. Then he called the astrologers and said to them, "Expound to me my dream." "What was the dream?" asked they. And he answered, "As I slept last night, I saw my father standing before me, with his yard uncovered, and there came forth of it a thing, the bigness of a bee, which grew till it became as a mighty lion, with claws like hangers. As I lay wondering at this, lo, it ran upon me, and smiting me with its claws, rent my belly in sunder, whereupon I awoke startled and trembling. So expound me the meaning of this dream." The interpreters looked one at another, and after considering said, "O mighty king, this dream pointeth to one born of thy sire, between whom and thee shall befall strife and enmity, wherein he shall get the better of thee. So be on thy guard against him by reason of this thy vision." When Ajib heard their words, he said, "I have no brother whom I should fear, so this your speech is mere lying." They replied, "We tell thee naught save what we know." But he was angered with them and bastooed them. Then he rose, and going to the paternal palace, examined his father's concubines, and found one of them 7 months gone with child. Whereupon he gave an order to 2 of his slaves, saying, "Take this damsel, ye twain, and carry her to the seashore, and drown her." So they took her forthright, and going to the seashore, designed to drown her. When they looked at her, and seeing her to be of a singular beauty and loveliness, said to each other, "Why should we drown this damsel? Let us carry her to the forest, and live with her there in rare loveliness." Then they took her, and fared on her for days and nights, till they had borne her far away, and had brought her to a bushy forest, abounding in fruit trees and streams, where they both thought at the same time to win their will of her. But each said, "I will have her first." So they fell out one and the other concerning this, and while so doing, a company of blackamoors came down upon them, and they drew their swords, and both sides fell to laying on load. The melee waxed hot with cut and thrust, and the 2 slaves fought their best, but the blacks slew them both in less than the twinkling of an eye. So the damsel abode alone, and wandered about the forest, eating of its fruits and drinking of its founts, till in due time she gave birth to a boy, brown but clean-limbed and comely, whom she named Gharib, the stranger, by reason of her strangerhood. Then she cut his navel string, and wrapping him in some of her own clothes, gave him to suck, harrowed at heart, and with vitals sorrowing for the estate she had lost, in its honor and solace. And Shahrazad perceived the dawn of the day, and ceased saying her permitted say. Now, when it was the 625th night, she said, "It hath reached me, O auspicious king, that the damsel abode in the bush harrowed at heart and sorrowed. But she suckled her babe, albeit she was full of grief and fear for her loneliness. Now behold, one day there came horsemen and footmen into the forest with hawks and hounds and horses laden with partridges and cranes and wild geese, and divers and other waterfowl, and young ostriches and hares and gazelles, and wild oxen and lynxes, and wolves and lions. Presently these Arabs entered into the thicket, and came upon the damsel sitting with her child on her breast, suckling him. So they drew near her and asked her, "Say, art thou a mortal or a jinnah?" Answered she, "I am a mortal, O chiefs of the Arabs." Thereupon they told their emir, whose name was Mardas, prince of the Banu Qatan, and who had come forth that day to hunt with 500 of his cousins and the nobles of his tribe, and who in the course of the chase had happened upon her. He bade them bring her before her, and when they did, and she related to him her past from first to last, whereat he marveled. Then he cried to his kinsmen and escort to continue the chase, after which they took her and returned to their encampment, where the emir appointed her a separate dwelling place and 5 damsels to serve her. And he loved her with exceeding love, and went into her and lay with her. She conceived by him straightway, and when her months were accomplished, she bare a man-child, and named him Sahim al-Lail. He grew up with her brother Gharib among the nurses, and throve and waxed upon the lap of the emir Madras, who in due time committed the 2 boys to a fake for instruction in the things of their faith, after which he gave them in charge to valiant knights of the Arabs, for training them to smite with swords and lunge with lances and shoot with shafts. So by the time they reached the age of 15, they knew all they needed and surpassed each and every brave in their tribe. For Gharib would undertake 1,000 horse, and Sahim al-Lail no fewer. Now Madras had many enemies, and the men of his tribe were the bravest of all the Arabs, being doughty cavaliers. None might warm himself at their fire. In his neighborhood was an emir of the Arabs, Hassan bin Sabit Height, who was his intimate friend, and he took to a wife a noble lady of his tribe, and bade all his friends to the wedding, amongst them Madras, lord of the Banu Qatan, who accepted his invitation and set forth with 300 riders of his tribe, leaving other 400 to guard the women. Hassan met him with honor and seated him in the highest stead. Then came all the cavaliers to the bridal, and he made them bride feasts, and held high festivals by reasoning of the marriage, after which the Arabs departed to their dwelling places. When Madras came in sight of his camp, he saw slain men lying about, and birds hovering over them right and left, and his heart sank within him at the sight. Then he entered the camp, and was met by Gharib, clad in complete suit of ring mail, who gave him joy of his safe arrival. Quoth Madras, What meaneth this case, O Gharib? And he quoth, Gharib, Al-Haman bin Majid attacked us with 500 horsemen of his tribe. Now the reason of this was that the emir Madras had a daughter called Mahidra, seeing no fairer than she, and Al-Hamal, lord of the Banu Nabhan, heard of her charms. Whereupon he took horse with 500 of his men and rode to Madras to demand her hand. But he was not accepted, and sent away disappointed. So he waited till Madras was absent of his visit to Hassan, when he mounted with his champions and fell upon the camp of the Banu Qatan, and slew a number of their knights, and the rest fled to the mountains. Now Gharib and his brother had ridden forth a hunting and chasing with 100 horse, and returned not till midday, when they found that Al-Hamal had seized the camp and all therein, and carried off the maidens, among whom was Madira, driving her away with the captives. When Gharib saw this, he lost his wits for rage, and cried out to Sahim, saying, O my brother, O son of an accursed dam, they have plundered our camp, and carried off our women and children. Up and at the enemy, that we may deliver the captives. So Gharib and Sahim and their 100 horse rushed upon the foe, and Gharib's wrath redoubled, and he heaped a harvest of heads slain, giving the champions death cup to drain, till he won to Al-Hamal, and saw Mahidra among the captives. Then he drave at the lord of the Banu Nabhan braves, with his lance lunged him, and from his destrier hurled him. Nor was the time of mid-afternoon prayer come before he had slain the most part of the foe, and put to rout the rest, and rescued the captives, whereupon he returned to the camp in triumph, bearing the head of Al-Hamal on the point of his lance, and improvising these couplets. I am he who was known on the day of fight, and the jinn of earth at my shade take fright. And a sword, when I have my right hands weld, death hastens from left on mankind to alight. I have eke a lance, and who took thereon, see a crescent head of the lightliest lamp. And Gharib, I'm heat of my tribe the brave, and if few my men I feel not affright. Hardly had Gharib made an end of these verses, when up came Madras, who seeing the slain and the vultures was sore troubled, and with fluttering heart asked the cause. The youth, after due greetings, related all that had befallen the tribe in his stepsire's absence. So Marjas thanked him and said, "Thou hast well requited our fosterage pains in rearing thee, O Gharib." Then he alighted and entered his pavilion, and the men stood about him, all the tribes, praising Gharib and saying, "O my Emir, but for Gharib not one of the tribe had been saved." And Marjas thanked him again. And Shahrazad perceived the dawn of the day, and ceased to say her permitted say. And so do I cease the telling of these tales for the day, till it be morrow.